anything new today, so if you didn't get the handout from the back, you need to get it. We're just going to talk about everything we've already learned about solving quadratics today. So this paper, no matter what I did, I could not get it to rotate it in the file. So every time I tried to put it on here, it put it sideways. So this is the paper you need. So I just had to take snippets of it so we could have it the right way to look at it. So the different methods that we've talked about for solving quadratics are on this page. There's one other method that I did give you a handout on. It was called completing the square. And in Get More Math today, some of the instructions will say use completing the square. Okay, completing the square is the precursor to the quadratic formula. Okay, so just use the quadratic formula. The completing the square proves the quadratic formula works. We don't have time in class to go in depth on the completing the square when it's just going to lead us to the quadratic formula anyway. Does that make sense? So, so when it says to use completing the square, just use the quadratic formula to solve those problems to get your answer. But so the thing we talked about last Friday, goodness, on Friday last week was the square root property. This one is easiest to use when there's no bx term. Where is the bx term found in your problem? What do we call that? The x one. It's the middle term, right? So if there's no middle term, okay, if there's no middle term, then the square root property is probably your easiest one to work and solve and use. Okay? The square root property is the only one also that you don't make equal to 0. Okay? You don't make it equal to 0 because you're trying to get the x squared term all by itself. Which means if you're doing that, then everything else has to get moved to the other side, and that may not always be 0. And so it's the only one that you won't make it equal to 0 before you do anything with it. So here's our example problem here. If I want to get my x squared term by itself, what would I need to do first to solve for that?
Subtract 75.
Subtract 75 from both sides. Right? Yeah. Okay, subtract 75 from both sides. That leaves me 2x squared equals, well, what's 125 minus 75? 50. Yep. And then to finish getting x squared by itself, I need to divide both sides by 2. All right, so x squared equals what? 25. X squared equals 25. How do I undo squaring something?
You root it.
Take the root. Okay? Square root it. So x equals plus or minus 5 because the square root of 25 is 5. And when you take the square root, you have to make it plus or minus. Okay. This is why solutions to a quadratic are called roots. Because we took the root of the problem, right? The second method that we talked about was factoring and using factoring to solve. This only works if it's a factorable quadratic. But if it's factorable, then it's easy to factor it and get your equation. What is the factoring method that makes it the easiest? Oops. The star method.
Oh, the box?
Okay.
Oh, just that?
The star. Okay. The X box, if you prefer that method, is another one. Right? What goes in the top of my star?
Your A and C.
A times C. What goes in the bottom?
Your B,
B. What goes on the sides?
A.
And then the numbers that you have to find, right? These two numbers have to multiply to equal your AC, okay, your top. Okay. And these numbers have to add to equal your B. Okay. So that's the quick refresher notes on how you factor. In this one, if you're going to factor, you do have to make it equal to 0. It has to equal 0 before you can factor it, because you can't use the zero product property if it doesn't equal 0. So in my example problem over here, I'm going to list my A, my B, and my C over here to the side. What does my A equal?
1.
1. What does my B equal?
1.
1. And my C?
12. Negative 12.
Negative 12. So when I make my star, what's going to go in the top?
Negative 12.
Negative 12, because it's positive 1 times negative 12. Okay. And in the bottom,
1.
1. And on my two sides, 1 also, because my A happens to be the same as my B in this case. Okay. Now I'm going to figure out I need two numbers that multiply to equal negative 12, right, and add to equal 1. Okay. So I need my bigger number to be positive. So 1 times negative 12, does that add to give me 1?
No.
But I just said I need my bigger number to be positive, right? So what about negative 1 plus 12?
Yeah.
Still not work? Does that equal 1?
No.
No. Okay, so negative 2 times 6?
No.
No. Negative 3 times 4?
Yes.
So negative 3 and 4. Okay. Now, to write this as factors, does it simplify anymore?
No.
No. So it's going to be x minus 3 times x plus 4 equals 0. This is the factors. This is what it means to factor it, or list the factors. Both of these things are the factors. So I'm going to take the factors and make them equal to 0, right? Separate them to use that zero product property and solve. So add 3 to both sides for this one. So x equals positive 3, or subtract 4. So x equals negative 4. There's my two solutions. What is the other method that I told you you could use? instead of writing them out as their factors. Right? If I take the opposite of what's there, opposite sign, and flip it, okay, so the opposite sign of negative 1 over 3 is positive, right? And it becomes a positive 3 over 1, which equals 3. And if I did the same thing over here, right, and I did a negative 4 over 1, it reduces to negative 4. Did I get the same solutions? Okay, so they're the same. Either method that you choose. It may depend on what the question is asking you, whether or not you need to know what your factors are, or whether you're needing to know the solutions. So the next one is the one that we learned yesterday, the quadratic formula. Okay. This one always works. Okay. So if nothing else, if you don't want to try to see if there's an easier way to do it by using one of those other methods, then this one will always work. As long as you know how to use it appropriately, it will always work. You still have to make sure that your equation equals 0. Okay? So it has to be equal to 0. For it to work. So again, in this one, I'm going to list my A, my B, and my C. What's my A? 3. What's my B? 1. And my C? Negative 3. It's already equal to 0, so all I had to do was just figure out what my A, B, and C are. Now I'm going to substitute them in to the quadratic formula. So a negative, and I'm going to use the same strategy as yesterday where I have parentheses around everything that I substitute in. So negative a negative 1, because that's what my B is, plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 3 all over 2 times 3. Now, you can put it in the calculator exactly like this. And if it gives you a decimal answer, that means you might have to go back and figure out what it actually is. So I suggest that you don't try to put this big whole thing in your calculator. Okay. Use just what's under here in your calculator. Because depending on how that reduces, will tell you a lot about your answer. That is the discriminant. Remember how we talked about the discriminant before we actually talked about the quadratic formula? Okay, and we talked about if this, right, equals a positive number, okay, then there's two solutions. Okay, if this equals 0, then there's one solution. And if this equals a negative number, then there's no solution. Okay, you now see why that's the case after we did those example problems yesterday with the quadratic formula, right? Because if it's 0 under there, the square root of 0 is 0, and it doesn't make you have two separate answers. If there's actually a positive number under there, then you do have to add whatever it is and subtract whatever it is because you're taking the square root. If it's a negative, it's no solution because you can't take the square root of a negative number. Okay, so that's why the discriminant tells us what it tells us. So when you simplify this, if you simplify that in your calculator, you should have got 37. That'd be underneath the radical. Does 37 simplify anymore? No, it does not. It's a prime number. So I'm done. That's my answer. However, if that you need the decimal answer and you need both solutions, you would need to put this in your calculator with a plus the square root of 37 over 6 and a minus the square root of 37 over 6 to get the two decimal answers. Okay, that answer is two answers because of this plus or minus there. And your calculator does not do plus or minus. You have to actually either add it or actually either subtract it. Does that make sense? Okay, those of you that got your head down, head up for me so I know you're not sleeping. And hood's off too, please. Okay. The last one is graphing. Okay, this one is really best if your answers are integer answers. Or simple fractions or whatever, okay, simple decimals. Because it's hard to pinpoint something if it's not on an exact grid line, right? So the other thing, notice again, it has to be equal to 0. Okay. The x-intercepts are the solutions. This one, if I were not going to graph it, if this was not my example for graphing, what would be the easiest of those three methods above it to work this one out?
The quadratic. No.
That first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first one, because if I add 1 to both sides, right, I would have x squared equals 1. Well, what's the square root of x? What's the square root of 1? 1, right? Positive 1 times itself gives me 1, and negative 1 times itself gives me 1. So I already know if I were to work this out, what my solutions would be. My solutions would be negative 1 and positive 1. In Get More Math, sometimes when you're graphing it, it wants you to give the coordinates as a table. This means Figure out some points on the graph. Get it to graph it for you in the calculator if that's what you're going to do, right? And then figure out what some key points are. One of the points that they want you to use for sure is the vertex point. So in this, if I have a table there, I would need to list that point in my table. What is the coordinate for this point?
Zero, negative 1.
0, negative 1, right? I started listing it backwards too because I was just thinking it's negative 1. But it's 0, negative 1. So my x is 0, my y is negative 1. Right? Another coordinate would be maybe this one. Right? This coordinate is 0, 1. So that would be another one I could list over here. Oh, not 0, 1. I listed it backwards too. Goodness gracious. I'm backwards today. Okay, it is 1, 0, because it's where y equals 0. So my x is 1 and my y is 0. Okay. If I needed another coordinate, I've got another one right here, right? Or if I wanted to know what it is when x is 2, okay, then I could substitute it into my equation if you don't have the graph, right? So 2 squared minus 1 equals what? This is what I'm looking for. You're not going to write your 0 when you're solving for it. You're going to figure out what it is. So 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So if x is 2, my y coordinate would be 3. And if I'm graphing this, then my graph would look like this. Okay? It needs to be U-shaped. It's not going to be a V shape. Okay? Notice that these 2 points right here, down close to the vertex, are closer to the vertex, and then it spreads out. The points get further and further away the more you go up. So they're not spaced out exactly even. Like a line, it's a curve. Okay, it's a U shape, that's why it's curved. Okay. Now I want to talk about a couple of other things. So this ties back to filling out a table, especially if you don't have the calculator from the classroom that you can just hit Control-T and get the table, right? But last week on the warm-up problems, I gave you a problem and I asked you to figure out what like f of 3 is. Okay? This means I'm going to take this number. This is just asking if x equals 3, what is this problem going to equal? So I'm going to substitute 3 in for my x's. So f of 3 is 5 times 3 squared plus 3 times 3 minus 12. So 5 times 9, because 3 squared is 9, plus 9 minus 12. I get 45 plus 9 minus 12. So 45 plus 9 minus 12 gives me, equals 54 minus 12, which gives me 42. Okay, so I would say f of 3 equals 42. Okay. So the parentheses, when it's written in function notation, does not mean multiply. Okay, several of you said, well, f of 1 equals 1f. No, that's not right. Okay? That's not what it is. It means to replace all of your x's with 3 or whatever number's in the parentheses. Okay? If it gives you g of x and whatever that function is, and then it says what's g of 5, then you're going to substitute 5 into the g function, not the f function. Okay? That's what it's telling you.
Or you still do the same thing.
Still do the same thing. You're just, if it says g of 5, then you would use whatever equation says g of x equals whatever. Does that make sense? Okay, this is just the name of the function, so that way you'll know which one to substitute it in for. Now, 2 other things that I want to talk about. Okay, on yesterday's assignment in Go Formative, this is what it looks like on my side. This is not what it looks like on your side. So if you need to take a picture of this screen really quick, get out your phone, take a picture of this screen. These are the formats. Okay, this is the answer, actual answer to number 1 and 6. Okay, you're given a blank space to put your answer in. Okay, so it says here, type your answer in this spot. Okay, these are the answer choices that will, or not the answer choices, it doesn't give you choices. Okay, but these are the formats that how you can type it in. If you're giving me the list of coordinates, okay, the list of possible x values, you have to put them in the parentheses and put a comma, or in the braces, okay, and put a comma between them. Okay. I prefer the fraction, but notice I did allow for the decimal answer in this case because it's a simple decimal answer. It's not a square root decimal answer. It's just where you had to divide by 2. So that's okay. The other way that you can do this is to list it as 2 coordinates. Okay, if you're listing it as 2 coordinates, then you would use the parentheses. Okay, and you would have to use whatever your x equals with a 0, comma, whatever your other x equals with a 0. Okay, that's the only way that it will accept the coordinates, is if you put them in parentheses as actual coordinates. You cannot mix those up. You can't put this one in parentheses like this because that's an ordered pair. That's not a list. Okay, that's why it won't accept that answer. Now, if you've got these answers typed in and they're correct, before you erase everything and think you've done something wrong because you can't get it correct, flip-flop your answers. Notice that I forgot when I put my answers in here to also list the combination, okay, of negative 4.5, 2. Okay, I didn't list that combination. They're the correct answer either way. I just forgot that. I mean, when I was going through putting my possible answers in, I neglected to use that combination. I'd have like 16 possible answers if I went through and did that for all of them. Okay, so rearrange it and see if that gets you a green dot. Okay, if it still doesn't, then you probably do have something wrong. Okay, make sure there's no spaces between anything. If there's no spaces in anything, that will also make it wrong because it's real finicky that way. Okay, so now if that's your answer has a square root in it, like number 6 will, right, then notice there's no braces around this or parentheses around it. You can, but I didn't put it in my answer choices, so it'll count it wrong if you include it, and I don't have it there. Okay, notice that I also included the one that's not simplified all the way. Okay, so I also included that one as a possible answer because I would know that you're on the right track. You just didn't get it simplified all the way. Okay, use the keyboard to get it in a fraction form first, and then type what needs to go on top, and then type what needs to go on bottom. If you try to type the top part and then do divide or put it in a fraction, it'll only take that last part and put it as a fraction. Yeah. So you have to do the fraction first. And in the little keyboard, it looks like an X with a blank box like this. Okay, So that's the button that you would use to get a fraction. Okay, the X doesn't show up when you put in there, just the fraction bar does with the 2 blank boxes. Okay, so that's the format that you would do for those. Okay, the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning of class already was in Get More Math to put your answers in. It may accept it in other formats, but from what I could tell earlier today, if you do X equals and a number, comma, X equals a number, it will almost always work in Get More Math. Okay. So there are 15 problems that are just review of solving, so you can use all the different methods to solve for them and Get More Math. Okay, you have Friday's assignment if it wasn't finished yet. You have yesterday's assignment if it wasn't finished yet. So you have plenty to work on for the rest of the class period. You have about 13 minutes or so. So that's plenty of time to get some stuff done. So everybody should be working on something. Okay. We have 2 more lessons to go. Well, actually, 1 more lesson to go. But we'll spend 2 days on it, which is the word problem, quadratic word problem stuff. Then we'll do our test review. Next week on Tuesday, if you're taking the English 1 star, okay, then you will be doing your English 1, and I won't see you on Tuesday morning, okay, unless you're done early and you might be in here, okay? On Wednesday and Thursday, you will take the mock algebra star in my class and in your English class. We will not have a separate Unit 10 test. Your Unit 10 test will be incorporated in the mock star. I will pull out the questions that had to do with Unit 10, and those will be your test grade for Unit 10. You will get a separate test grade for participation in the mock star, but you will get your test grade for Unit 10 based on the Unit 10 questions that I will include on the mock star. Does that make sense? I didn't want to give you the mock star and then also have to give you a unit test right after that. Okay, so it's just going to all be incorporated in that one. Then we got 1 more unit that has 3 lessons, and then we'll be doing star review after that. Okay? Splash your face with water so you can wake up. Hey, you might want to take your mask with you so you don't get in trouble in the hallway.